Welcome back to Law 2 Action, where we dive deep into gaming's most thrilling adventures. Today, we venture into the floating city of Colombia to explore the complete story of BioShock Infinite. Over the next few hours, we'll uncover the intricate web of alternate realities, time-bending prophecies, and the tragic tale of a man divided between two destinies. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's embark on this epic journey together into one of gaming's most mind-bending narratives. 1. The foundations of Colombia. High above the clouds in 1912, a city floats in defiance of gravity itself. Colombia, named for the female personification of the United States, represents the pinnacle of American exceptionalism. This technological marvel was conceived and brought to life by a man who called himself a prophet, a leader who claimed divine inspiration for his grand vision. Zachary Hale Comstock, the self-proclaimed father of Colombia, founded this floating metropolis with backing from the United States government. Originally conceived as a floating World's Fair to showcase American technological superiority and cultural values, Colombia became something far more complex and sinister. The city was launched in 1893 with great fanfare, presented to the world as a shining beacon of American achievement suspended in the heavens. The technology that made Colombia possible came from the brilliant mind of Rosalind Lutete, a quantum physicist whose experiments with atomic manipulation created what she called the Lutece field. Through this revolutionary technology, she could lock atoms in fixed positions in space, essentially allowing objects to defy gravity. Comstock took great interest in her research, claiming that her scientific breakthrough was the means to fulfill a divine vision he had received. Comstock's Colombia was built on a foundation of extreme nationalism, racial supremacy, and religious fundamentalism. The city's ruling party, the Founders, embodied ultra-nationalist ideologies that painted America as the new Eden and the Founding Fathers as prophets of God's grand design. Within Colombia's floating districts, a rigid social hierarchy existed where white Protestant Americans held absolute power, while minorities and immigrants were relegated to servant roles or outright excluded. The city's architecture reflected these beliefs, with monuments to the Founding Fathers treated as religious shrines and propaganda depicting American exceptionalism at every turn. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson were venerated as divine figures, their images and quotes used to justify Colombia's increasingly extreme policies. But Colombia's relationship with the surface world grew strained when the city independently intervened in the Boxer Rebellion in China. This unauthorized military action by a supposedly neutral exhibition piece angered the United States government and marked the beginning of Colombia's separation from its homeland. Ultimately, Comstock led Colombia's secession from the United States, and the city disappeared into the clouds, becoming a sovereign nation floating above the world. 2. The prophet's true identity. The man known as Zachary Hale Comstock harbours a secret that strikes at the very heart of identity and redemption. To understand Comstock, we must journey backward through time to the winter of 1890 and the massacre at Wounded Knee Creek. Here, a young soldier named Booker DeWitt participated in one of the most shameful episodes in American military history. Booker DeWitt served with the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army during the Indian Wars. At Wounded Knee, he witnessed and participated in the systematic slaughter of Lakota Sioux, including women and children. The exact nature of his actions remains shrouded in his own psychological defenses, but the weight of what he did left him consumed with guilt and searching desperately for absolution. His actions during the massacre earned him the nickname White Injun and ultimately the rank of Staff Sergeant before he left the army. After the massacre, DeWitt found himself at a river baptism conducted by Preacher Whitting. Here, at this crucial moment, reality split into two paths. In one timeline, Booker DeWitt could not bring himself to accept the baptism. He walked away from the river, carrying his guilt and shame into a future of gambling, drinking, and private investigation work. This Booker would eventually meet a woman and father a daughter named Anna, though he would struggle with debt and self-loathing. But in another timeline, another version of Booker DeWitt accepted the preacher's offer of spiritual cleansing. He allowed himself to be submerged in those sacred waters and emerged claiming to be reborn as a new man. This baptized version took the name Zachary Hale Comstock, and with his newfound religious fervor, he began to reshape not only his own identity, but his understanding of his role in God's plan. Comstock embraced his transformation completely, using his military experience and his claimed spiritual rebirth to become a charismatic religious leader. He rarely spoke of his life before the baptism, constructing an elaborate mythology around his emergence as a prophet. The guilt that had driven Booker to the river became, for Comstock, proof of his need for divine purpose. This fundamental split in identity explains much about Comstock's later actions and beliefs. Having been reborn through baptism, he became obsessed with the concept of cleansing and rebirth. He viewed himself as an instrument of divine will, chosen to lead the chosen people to their destiny above the clouds. The massacre at Wounded Knee, which had been a source of trauma for Booker, became for Comstock a proving ground where he demonstrated his worthiness as a soldier of God. The transformation from DeWitt to Comstock was not merely psychological, but had physical consequences as well. Comstock's frequent exposure to the Lutece twins' reality-altering device caused accelerated aging and rendered him sterile, giving him the appearance of a much older man, despite being only 38 years old during the events of 1912. This premature aging served to enhance his prophetic image, while simultaneously creating new challenges for his dynastic ambitions. 3. The science of tears and prophecy. At the heart of Columbia's impossibility lie the scientific achievements of the Lutece twins, though they are not twins in any conventional sense. Rosalind Lutece and Robert Lutece are the same person from different realities, brought together by their shared genius and complementary perspectives on quantum mechanics. Rosalind Lutece, the female version from Columbia's reality, pioneered the research that made the floating city possible. Her Lutece field could suspend atoms in fixed positions in space, effectively creating localized areas where gravity ceased to function as expected. But her experiments went far beyond simple levitation. Through her manipulation of quantum mechanics, she discovered the existence of parallel universes and developed technology that could create windows between these realities. These windows became known as tears, visible rifts in space-time that allowed observation of and travel between alternate worlds. Comstock quickly recognized the potential of this technology, not just for maintaining Columbia's position in the sky, but for gaining knowledge of future events. By peering through tears into parallel realities where similar events had already occurred, Comstock could make seemingly impossible predictions about the future. This technological precognition became the foundation of Comstock's reputation as a prophet. His accurate predictions of Columbia's enemies, the coming of the false shepherd, and the future role of Elizabeth all stemmed from his ability to observe parallel timelines where these events had already unfolded. What his followers believed to be divine revelation was actually advanced quantum physics masquerading as prophecy. Based on the evidence scattered throughout Columbia, we can infer that Comstock's frequent exposure to the tear-creating machinery came with severe costs. The quantum fields generated by the device caused cellular damage that manifested as accelerated aging and cancer. More importantly for Columbia's future, the exposure rendered Comstock sterile, unable to father the heir he needed to continue his prophetic lineage. Robert Lutece, the male version from an alternate reality, was brought into Columbia's timeline by Rosalind's experiments. Initially, he He served as Comstock's willing collaborator, helping to refine the tear technology and assisting with Comstock's plans. However, Robert would eventually develop moral qualms about their work, particularly regarding Comstock's solution to his sterility problem. The tears also had unintended consequences throughout Columbia. Their presence began to blur the boundaries between realities, causing objects, ideas, and even people from other timelines to appear in Columbia. Music from decades in the future, technological concepts that hadn't been invented yet, and cultural elements from alternate histories all found their way into Columbia through these quantum leaks, though most citizens remained unaware of the true source of these anachronistic elements. The Luteces discovered that their tear technology could do more than just observe other realities. It could actually transport matter and people between them. This discovery would prove crucial when Comstock decided to acquire an heir through methods that would strain even his considerable capacity for self-justification. 4. The tragedy of Elizabeth's origin. Perhaps no story in Columbia is more heartbreaking than the origin of Elizabeth Comstock, the young woman who would become central to the city's ultimate fate. Her story begins not in Columbia, but in another reality entirely, with a desperate father's moment of weakness and a stolen childhood. In an alternate timeline, Booker DeWitt never underwent baptism and never became Comstock. Instead, he remained a broken veteran struggling with gambling debts and the weight of his actions at Wounded Knee. In this reality, Booker met a woman whose name remains lost to history, though records suggest she may have been called Annabelle, and fathered a daughter named Anna DeWitt. When his debts became overwhelming and his creditors turned threatening, Booker found himself facing an impossible choice. On October 8, 1893, Robert Lutece approached this alternate Booker with an offer from his reality's Comstock. Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. Desperate and drowning in guilt and financial ruin, Booker agreed to sell his infant daughter to pay off his gambling debts. The transaction would eliminate his obligations and give Anna to people who could presumably provide better for her than a broken-down private investigator. But as soon as Booker handed over his baby daughter, regret consumed him. He changed his mind and desperately tried to stop the transaction, pursuing Comstock and Robert Lutece as they prepared to escape through a tear back to their own reality. In the struggle that followed, a crucial moment would forever mark the child's fate. As the tear began to close with Anna halfway through it, the dimensional barrier severed the tip of her right pinky finger. The finger remained in Booker's reality while the rest of Anna passed through to Comstock's world. This traumatic amputation had consequences far beyond the physical wound. It left Anna existing simultaneously in two realities, a condition that would manifest extraordinary abilities as she grew. Comstock raised Anna as his own daughter, renaming her Elizabeth and constructing an elaborate mythology around her origins. To the people of Columbia, she was Comstock's divinely blessed child, destined to inherit his prophetic mantle and lead Columbia to its ultimate victory over the Sodom below. Comstock claimed that Elizabeth was born of divine intervention, a miracle child sent to continue his sacred mission. The reality was far more complex and disturbing. Comstock had essentially kidnapped a child from another version of himself, justifying this act as fulfilling God's plan for Columbia's future. He constructed the elaborate Monument Island Tower as both Elizabeth's home and her prison, surrounding her with books, art, and education, while keeping her completely isolated from the outside world. To ensure Elizabeth's isolation and control her growing abilities, Comstock commissioned the construction of the Siphon, a massive device designed to dampen and control her reality-manipulating powers. This machine limited Elizabeth's ability to create tears, keeping her abilities at a manageable level while preventing her from discovering the truth about her origins or escaping from Columbia. Elizabeth's guardian and warden was the Songbird, a massive mechanical creature designed with one purpose: to keep Elizabeth safe within her tower and prevent any attempt at escape. The songbird's bond with Elizabeth was both protective and possessive, programmed to love her as a daughter while also serving as her jailer. As Elizabeth grew into young adulthood, her existence became increasingly tragic. She possessed vast intellectual curiosity and dreamed of seeing the wider world, particularly Paris, which she knew only through books and paintings. Yet she remained trapped in her tower, unaware that her entire life was built on lies and that her true father existed in another reality, forever haunted by his moment of weakness. 5. The false shepherd arrives. July 6, 1912, marked the day prophecy and reality would collide in Colombia. On this date, a man bearing the mark of the false shepherd arrived in the floating city, setting in motion events that would fulfill Comstock's predictions, while simultaneously destroying everything he had built. Booker DeWitt, the broken private investigator from an alternate reality, found himself rowing toward a lighthouse off the coast of Maine with no clear memory of how he had arrived there. His companions were the mysterious Lutece twins, Robert and Rosalind, whose cryptic comments and seemingly supernatural knowledge suggested they were far more than ordinary passengers. The journey to the lighthouse had been arranged by the Luteces as part of their complex plan to rectify the damage caused by Comstock's theft of Anna. They had approached Booker with an offer: complete this mysterious assignment, and his debts would be wiped away. The assignment seemed simple enough: bring us the girl and wipe away the debt, though Booker had no memory of the deeper significance these words held. At the top of the lighthouse, Booker discovered a rocket-powered chair that launched him through the clouds toward Columbia. His arrival in the floating city coincided with Columbia's annual celebration of its secession from the United States, a festival that combined religious ceremony with patriotic fervor and racial supremacy. Initially, Booker moved through Columbia undetected, observing the city's elaborate celebrations and becoming increasingly disturbed by its overt racism and religious extremism. The city's propaganda was inescapable. Posters depicting the Founding Fathers as divine figures, warnings about foreign influence and promises of racial purity dominated every public space. Booker's cover was blown during a raffle at the Columbia Fair, when he was selected to participate in what was revealed to be a deeply racist spectacle. The winner was supposed to throw the first ball at an interracial couple as punishment for their relationship. When Booker refused to participate in this grotesque display, alert citizens spotted the letters AD branded on his right hand. These letters marked Booker as the false shepherd prophesied by Comstock. According to the prophecy, the false shepherd would arrive bearing these marks and would attempt to lead Columbia's lamb, Elizabeth, astray, bringing about the city's downfall. The revelation of Booker's identity turned him from anonymous visitor to most wanted fugitive in a matter of moments. Fighting his way through increasingly hostile crowds and security forces, Booker made his way toward Monument Island, where Elizabeth was imprisoned. The irony was not lost on the universe. Booker DeWitt had indeed come to take away Comstock's daughter, though not for the reasons either version of himself originally understood. The Luteces' plan was beginning to unfold exactly as they had foreseen. They had brought Booker to Columbia, not just to reunite him with his daughter, but to set in motion the events that would ultimately destroy Comstock and everything he represented. The false shepherd had arrived, and Columbia's day of reckoning was at hand. 6. Liberation and discovery. Monument Island stood as both monument and prison, a massive stone structure rising from Columbia's waters where Elizabeth spent her isolated existence. When Booker finally reached the tower, he discovered a young woman who had spent 20 years dreaming of freedom while surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of the world. Elizabeth's initial reaction to Booker's arrival mixed terror with desperate hope. Having never encountered another human being besides her songbird guardian and the occasional delivery personnel, she had no context for trusting a stranger who claimed he could take her away from her prison. Her desperation to see Paris, the city of lights that existed only in her books and imagination, ultimately convinced her to trust this mysterious rescuer. Their escape from Monument Island triggered the Songbird's protective protocols. The massive mechanical guardian pursued them with single-minded determination, its bond with Elizabeth manifesting as both love and possessive rage. The destruction of the tower during their escape served as a dramatic announcement to all of Columbia that the prophesied events were beginning to unfold. As Booker and Elizabeth fled through Columbia, several crucial discoveries reshaped their understanding of the city and themselves. Elizabeth's ability to manipulate reality through tears became apparent almost immediately, allowing her to open windows to other dimensions and bring objects, weapons, and even environmental changes into their reality. These abilities fascinated and disturbed Booker, who had no framework for understanding quantum mechanics or parallel realities. Elizabeth herself had limited control over her powers, often manifesting tears involuntarily during moments of stress or emotional intensity. The siphon device on Monument Island had been suppressing these abilities, and their full strength was gradually returning as she moved further from its influence. Their journey through Columbia revealed the true nature of the city's social structure. Beyond the propaganda and celebrations lay a society built on systematic oppression and racial hierarchy. The working class districts showed the harsh reality behind Columbia's gleaming facade, where immigrant laborers and minority populations were treated as expendable resources. Elizabeth's reactions to these discoveries proved crucial to her character development. Having lived in isolation with only idealized books and art for reference, she was unprepared for the reality of prejudice and violence that defined her supposed homeland. Her moral compass, uncompromised by Columbia's indoctrination, consistently pointed toward justice and compassion. The pair's attempts to reach the First Lady's aerodrome and escape to Paris were complicated by both the Songbird's pursuit and Columbia's increasingly militarized response to their presence. Every step of their journey fulfilled another aspect of Comstock's prophecies, creating a feedback loop where prediction and reality reinforced each other. Meanwhile, Elizabeth began to experience fragmentary memories and visions that didn't match her official history, brief glimpses of another life, another father, and another name flickered at the edges of her consciousness. These memories would prove crucial as the truth about her origins gradually emerged through their shared adventures. 7. The Vox Populi Revolution. While Comstock's founders represented Columbia's ruling elite, an underground resistance movement called the Vox Populi had been growing in the city's shadows. Led by the charismatic Daisy Fitzroy, this revolutionary organization represented the oppressed workers, minorities, and immigrants who had been systematically excluded from Columbia's vision of American perfection. Daisy Fitzroy's transformation from domestic servant to revolutionary leader embodied the tensions that had been building in Columbia for years. Initially employed in Comstock House, she was framed for the murder of Lady Comstock, forcing her to flee into the underground and assume leadership of the resistance movement. Her personal grievances against the Comstock regime gave the Vox Populi a focused hatred that went beyond mere political opposition. The Vox Populi's ideology stood in stark contrast to the founders' racial supremacy and religious fundamentalism. Where the founders preached American exceptionalism and white superiority, the Vox advocated for workers' rights, racial equality, and the overthrow of Columbia's class-based society. Their ranks included Chinese immigrants, Irish laborers, African Americans, and working-class whites who had been marginalized by the founders' policies. When Booker and Elizabeth's presence in Columbia sparked increased security measures and crackdowns on dissent, the Vox Populi saw an opportunity to accelerate their revolutionary timeline. Fitzroy recognized that the chaos surrounding the false shepherd's arrival could be leveraged to launch their long-planned uprising against the founders. However, the revolution that followed revealed the complex moral landscape that defined BioShock Infinite's narrative. While the Vox Populi's grievances against the founders were entirely justified, their methods became increasingly extreme as the conflict escalated. Acts of legitimate resistance transformed into acts of vengeance and brutality that mirrored the oppression they had fought to overcome. Elizabeth's encounter with this moral complexity proved pivotal to her character development. Having lived in isolation with idealized notions of justice and liberation, she was unprepared for the reality that revolution often involves violence against innocent people. When she witnessed Vox forces threatening civilians and children, her commitment to absolute moral principles clashed with the messy reality of political upheaval. The revolution also revealed the extent to which Colombia's society had been built on unsustainable foundations. Years of racial oppression, economic exploitation, and political exclusion had created deep wells of resentment that erupted into citywide violence. The founders' vision of a perfectly ordered society collapsed when confronted with the justified anger of those they had oppressed. Through tears into alternate realities, Booker and Elizabeth discovered versions of Colombia where the revolution had taken different forms or achieved different outcomes. In some realities, the Vox Populi achieved victory but established their own oppressive regime. In others, the revolution failed completely, leaving the founders' control unchallenged. These glimpses into alternative outcomes demonstrated the complex nature of social change and the difficulty of predicting the consequences of revolutionary action. The Vox uprising ultimately served multiple narrative purposes. Beyond advancing the plot, it provided commentary on American history's legacy of racial oppression while exploring the moral complexity of violent resistance to systematic injustice. Most importantly, it forced both Booker and Elizabeth to confront the reality that good intentions do not automatically lead to good outcomes. 8. Revelations and betrayals. As Booker and Elizabeth delved deeper into Colombia's secrets, a series of shocking revelations began to reshape their understanding of everything they thought they knew. The truth about Elizabeth's origins, Comstock's identity, and the nature of Colombia itself emerged through a complex web of evidence that spanned multiple realities. The first major revelation concerned the Lutece twins themselves. Through various documents and recordings scattered throughout Colombia, Booker and Elizabeth discovered that Robert and Rosalind Lutece were not siblings, but rather the same person from different realities. Rosalind, the female Lutece from Colombia's reality, had used her tear technology to bring her male counterpart Robert from an alternate timeline where their gender was different. This discovery illuminated the true scope of the Lutece's experiments with parallel realities. Their work had gone far beyond simple scientific research, becoming a deliberate manipulation of probability and causality across multiple timelines. The Luteces revealed themselves to be operating according to their own mysterious agenda, one that involved correcting what they viewed as a fundamental error in the universe's structure. More disturbing was the revelation of Lady Comstock's true fate. Official Colombia history claimed that she had been murdered by the Vox terrorist Daisy Fitzroy, but the reality was far more sinister. Lady Comstock had discovered the truth about Elizabeth's origins, that her husband had stolen a child from another reality rather than fathering her naturally. Comstock had orchestrated his wife's murder to prevent this revelation from destroying his carefully constructed mythology. The conspiracy deepened with evidence that Comstock had also arranged the deaths of the Lutece twins when they began questioning his increasingly extreme plans for Elizabeth and Colombia. The Lutece's apparent murder was presented as another terrorist attack, but investigation revealed it to be another cover-up designed to protect Comstock's secrets. These revelations culminated in the most shocking discovery of all, Comstock's true identity. Through careful examination of evidence and Elizabeth's growing understanding of quantum mechanics, they uncovered the truth that Zachary Hale Comstock was actually an alternate version of Booker DeWitt himself. The prophet and the false shepherd were the same person. divided by a single moment of choice at a river baptism 22 years earlier. This revelation recontextualized everything about their journey. Booker's mission to rescue Elizabeth was literally an attempt to undo the consequences of his own alternate self's actions. The debt he was meant to clear wasn't financial but moral. He was seeking redemption for selling his daughter to another version of himself. Elizabeth's growing powers allowed her to perceive these connections across realities with increasing clarity. As her abilities strengthened due to distance from the siphon device, she began to see the quantum threads that connected all possible versions of events. This expanding awareness brought both knowledge and terrible responsibility as she realized the scope of the damage that Comstock's existence had caused across multiple timelines. The weight of these revelations forced both characters to confront fundamental questions about identity, responsibility, and the nature of choice. If Booker and Comstock were the same person, was Booker responsible for Comstock's crimes? If Elizabeth had the power to prevent future suffering by altering the past, what was her moral obligation to use that power? 9. The siphon and Elizabeth's true power. Monument Island's mysterious siphon device represented one of Columbia's most closely guarded secrets and most powerful technologies. This massive machine, built into the structure of Elizabeth's tower, served a dual purpose that reflected both Comstock's paranoia and his understanding of Elizabeth's true potential. The siphon was designed specifically to limit and control Elizabeth's reality-manipulating abilities. Through complex quantum field manipulation, the device created a dampening effect that prevented Elizabeth from accessing her full power while keeping her abilities at a level that seemed natural rather than supernatural. This technological solution allowed Comstock to benefit from Elizabeth's gifts while preventing her from becoming a threat to his control. Comstock's decision to build the siphon stemmed from his knowledge of Elizabeth's potential, gained through observing alternate timelines where her powers had developed unrestricted. In some realities, Elizabeth's abilities had grown to cosmic proportions, allowing her to reshape reality on a fundamental level. These visions of Elizabeth's unlimited power both excited and terrified Comstock, leading him to seek a technological solution that would let him harness her abilities while maintaining control. The device's construction required the combined expertise of the Lucchesi twins and Columbia's most advanced engineers. Its operation drew massive amounts of power from Columbia's quantum levitation systems, making it one of the city's most energy-intensive installations. The siphon's presence on Monument Island also served as a constant reminder of the technological superiority that kept Columbia floating in the clouds. As Elizabeth moved further from the siphon's influence during her escape with Booker, her abilities began to strengthen dramatically. What had initially manifested as small, controllable tears gradually expanded into massive rifts that could bring entire objects, environments, and even people from other realities. These growing powers often manifested involuntarily during moments of emotional stress or physical danger. Elizabeth's expanding abilities allowed her to perceive the fundamental structure of reality itself. She began to see the quantum threads that connected all possible versions of events, understanding how decisions in one timeline could affect outcomes across multiple realities. This cosmic awareness came with tremendous psychological pressure as she realized the scope of suffering that existed across infinite variations of Columbia's story. The siphon's ultimate destruction marked a crucial turning point in the narrative, when Booker and Elizabeth finally gained control of the Songbird and directed it to destroy the device. Elizabeth's full powers were unleashed for the first time. The resulting quantum cascade allowed her to perceive all possible realities simultaneously, giving her godlike awareness of the infinite variations of their story. This revelation of Elizabeth's true nature recontextualized her entire character arc. She wasn't simply a young woman with unusual abilities, but rather a cosmic entity capable of perceiving and manipulating the fundamental structure of reality. Her imprisonment on Monument Island hadn't just been about controlling her personally, but about preventing her from achieving a level of power that could reshape existence itself. The destruction of the siphon also revealed the true scope of Comstock's plans for Elizabeth. He hadn't simply wanted an heir to continue his dynasty, but had intended to use her reality-manipulating powers to extend Columbia's influence across all possible timelines. His vision of Columbia as the New Eden was meant to be literal. He wanted to replace every version of reality with his idealized city. 10. Constants and variables. One of BioShock Infinite's most profound concepts emerges through Elizabeth's growing understanding of quantum mechanics and parallel realities. The relationship between constants and variables that define existence across multiple timelines. As her powers expanded beyond the siphon's limitations, Elizabeth began to perceive patterns that governed all possible versions of their story. Constants represent elements that remain consistent across all realities, fundamental structures that define the basic parameters of existence. In the context of their story, certain elements appear in every timeline. There is always a man, always a lighthouse, and always a city. These constants form the unchanging foundation upon which infinite variations can be built. The man represents the central character whose choices drive the narrative, whether he appears as Booker DeWitt, Zachary Hale Comstock, or some other variation. His essential nature and the fundamental choice he faces remain constant. The lighthouse serves as the gateway between realities, the transition point where one version of the events gives way to another. The city represents the expression of the man's vision, whether it manifests as Columbia floating in the clouds or rapture hidden beneath the sea. Variables represent the infinite ways these constants can be expressed through different choices and circumstances. While there is always a man, a lighthouse, and a city, the specific details of their manifestation can vary dramatically. The man might accept baptism and become a religious zealot, or reject it and remain a broken veteran. The city might float in the sky or rest on the ocean floor. The lighthouse might launch visitors toward the heavens or draw them beneath the waves. This constant variable relationship explains why the Luteces' attempts to change events through bringing different versions of Booker to Columbia had failed repeatedly. They had been focusing on variables, trying to change specific outcomes, while ignoring the constants that made those outcomes inevitable. Each Booker they brought made slightly different choices, but the fundamental structure of the story remained unchanged. Elizabeth's growing awareness of these patterns allowed her to see beyond individual timelines to the meta-structure that governed all possible realities. She realized that preventing Comstock's crimes in one timeline would simply result in their repetition in countless others. The only way to truly solve the problem was to address its source at the level of constants rather than variables. This understanding led to Elizabeth's recognition that the baptism at Wounded Knee represented the crucial constant, the moment where Booker's choice would always create the possibility of Comstock's existence. No matter how many times they prevented specific instances of Comstock's crimes, new versions would continue to emerge from that fundamental choice point. The constants and variables concept also provides insight into the nature of free will within BioShock Infinite's universe. While characters appear to make choices, these choices occur within predetermined parameters that limit the range of possible outcomes. The illusion of unlimited freedom exists within a structure that actually constrains the truly significant decisions to a few crucial moments. This philosophical framework extends beyond the immediate story to comment on broader themes of determinism, choice, and responsibility. Elizabeth's godlike awareness of all possible outcomes raises questions about the nature of moral responsibility when one can see the consequences of every possible choice across infinite timelines. 11. The multiverse revealed. As Elizabeth's powers reached their full potential following the siphon's destruction, the true scope of the multiverse became apparent to both her and Booker. This revelation transformed their understanding of their situation from a simple rescue mission into a cosmic struggle with implications across infinite realities. Elizabeth's expanded awareness allowed her to perceive what she called the Sea of Doors, infinite gateways leading to countless variations of their story. In some realities, Columbia had never been built. In others, the Vox Populi had won their revolution. In still others, Comstock had successfully used Elizabeth's powers to conquer the surface world and establish his theocracy across multiple timelines. This cosmic perspective revealed the tragedy of infinite possibility. Every choice created new branches of reality, and in the aggregate, every possible outcome, no matter how terrible, was occurring somewhere in the multiverse. Elizabeth could see versions of herself and Booker playing out every conceivable variation of their relationship, from loving reunions to tragic separations to scenarios where they became enemies. The multiverse concept also explained many of the seemingly impossible elements they had encountered throughout Columbia. Music from decades in the future, technological concepts that hadn't been invented yet, and cultural elements from alternate histories had all leaked through tears into their reality. Columbia existed at a nexus point where multiple timelines intersected, making it a repository for elements from across the multiverse. Elizabeth's ability to open tears at will essentially made her a godlike entity capable of reshaping reality by bringing elements from other timelines into their own. However, this power came with a terrible burden of knowledge. She could see all the suffering that existed across infinite variations of their story, and she understood that preventing suffering in one reality often simply displaced it to another. The revelation of the multiverse also provided context for the Lutace's mysterious behavior and apparent immortality. Having been scattered across multiple realities by Comstock's assassination attempt, they existed in a quantum superposition that allowed them to move between timelines at will. Their apparent omniscience stemmed from their ability to observe outcomes across multiple realities and their experience with previous iterations of bringing Booker to Columbia. This cosmic awareness forced both Elizabeth and Booker to confront the question of what constituted meaningful action in the face of infinite possibility. If every choice they made was being made differently by alternate versions of themselves, did their specific decisions matter? Elizabeth's growing understanding suggested that while individual choices might be replicated across infinite timelines, certain fundamental decisions could affect the structure of the multiverse itself. The multiverse revelation also recontextualized the entire BioShock series. Elizabeth's brief glimpse of rapture during their journey suggested that Andrew Ryan's underwater city existed in another branch of the same cosmic structure. The constants of a man, a lighthouse, and a city could manifest as either Columbia in the sky or rapture beneath the sea, with the same fundamental dynamics playing out in different settings. 12. The Songbird's Bond. Among Columbia's many wonders and horrors, none proved more emotionally complex than the songbird, Elizabeth's mechanical guardian, whose relationship with her embodied both protection and imprisonment. This massive automaton represented the ultimate expression of Comstock's desire to control Elizabeth, while maintaining the illusion that he loved her as a father. The songbird was designed as the perfect guardian, absolutely loyal, completely devoted to Elizabeth's safety, and programmed with emotional responses that mimicked genuine care and affection. Its artificial intelligence was sophisticated enough to form a genuine bond with Elizabeth, while remaining steadfastly committed to keeping her confined to Monument Island. This created a psychological prison as powerful as any physical restraint. Elizabeth's relationship with the songbird was deeply complex, combining genuine affection with resentment over her imprisonment. Having never known human companionship during her formative years, she formed an emotional attachment to the mechanical creature that served as both protector and jailer. The Songbird's responses to her emotional states created the illusion of a caring relationship, even as its primary function was to prevent her escape. The creature's design incorporated elements that were both beautiful and terrifying. Its massive size and predatory appearance served as a deterrent to any potential rescuers, while its ability to emit haunting songs created an almost supernatural atmosphere around Monument Island. The Songbird's vocalizations served multiple purposes. They could soothe Elizabeth during moments of distress, communicate across vast distances, or unleash devastating sonic attacks against threats. Comstock's choice to create a mechanical, rather than human guardian reflected his deep paranoia about Elizabeth's future loyalty. A human guardian might develop independent thoughts or moral qualms about keeping a young woman imprisoned indefinitely. The Songbird, being mechanical, could be programmed with absolute loyalty to its directives while lacking the capacity for moral reflection that might lead to rebellion. The creature's programming included sophisticated emotional simulation designed to make Elizabeth's imprisonment feel less like captivity and more like protection. It could recognize her moods, respond to her needs, and even provide companionship during her long years of isolation. However, these programmed responses were ultimately hollow, lacking the genuine unpredictability and growth that characterize real relationships. When Elizabeth finally escaped with Booker, the Songbird's pursuit represented more than simple mechanical obedience to its programming. The creature's responses suggested something approaching genuine distress at losing its charge, blurring the lines between artificial and authentic emotion. Its relentless pursuit of Elizabeth throughout Colombia demonstrated the depth of its programmed attachment, while also revealing the tragic nature of their relationship. The ultimate resolution of Elizabeth and the Songbird's relationship came when she gained the power to control the creature rather than simply flee from it. Using a controlling device, she was able to redirect the Songbird's protective instincts toward destroying the siphon that had limited her powers for so long. This moment represented Elizabeth's transformation from passive victim to active agent of her own liberation. 13. The Vigors of Colombia. In the floating city of Colombia, the extraordinary became commonplace through the use of vigors, magical elixirs that granted superhuman abilities to those who consumed them. These bottled powers represented Colombia's attempt to democratize the supernatural, offering ordinary citizens access to abilities that bordered on the miraculous. Unlike Rapture's injectable plasmids, Colombia's vigors were consumed as drinkable tonics, reflecting the city's more genteel and civilized self-image. The bottles themselves were works of art, featuring elaborate labels and ornate designs that transformed magical powers into consumer products. This aesthetic choice reinforced Colombia's vision of itself as a refined society where even supernatural abilities were packaged with style and sophistication. The vigors available throughout Colombia included possession, which allowed users to temporarily control both machines and people, turning enemies into allies and extracting money from vending machines. Murder of crows enabled the summoning of a flock of aggressive ravens that would attack designated targets while leaving behind deadly traps. Devil's Kiss granted the power to hurl explosive fireballs that could bounce off surfaces before detonating, providing both direct damage and area denial capabilities. More exotic vigors included Bucking Bronco, which could levitate enemies in the air, leaving them helpless and vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Shock Jockey delivered electrical attacks that could stun enemies and overload mechanical systems. Charge allowed users to dash forward at incredible speed, closing distances instantly and delivering devastating melee attacks. Undertow manipulated water to push enemies away or pull them closer, while Return to Sender created protective barriers that could absorb and redirect incoming projectiles. Each vigor possessed both a basic activation mode and a more powerful charged alternative. The basic versions typically provided immediate offensive or defensive effects, while the charged versions often created traps or area of effect abilities that could control battlefield conditions. This dual-mode system encouraged tactical thinking and experimentation with different combinations and approaches. The origins of Vigors trace back to Jeremiah Fink's industrial espionage operations. Through Tears in Reality, Fink had observed Rapture's plasmid technology and adapted it for Columbia's needs. However, the transition from injectable serums to drinkable tonics required significant modifications to both the delivery system and the underlying Adam-based chemistry. This adaptation process resulted in powers that were similar to, but distinct from their Rapture counterparts. Fink's marketing of Vigors emphasized their miraculous nature while downplaying any potential risks or side effects. Advertisements throughout Columbia promised enhanced abilities and improved quality of life through Vigor consumption, presenting these supernatural powers as natural extensions of American ingenuity and progress. The reality was more complex, as frequent Vigor use could cause physical changes and psychological effects that weren't mentioned in the promotional materials. The limited availability of Vigors throughout Columbia suggested that they remained expensive and somewhat exclusive, despite Fink's mass marketing efforts. Most ordinary citizens seemed to lack access to these powers, limiting their use primarily to security forces, wealthy elites, and the occasional individual like Booker who acquired them through less conventional means. Combat applications of Vigors encouraged creative problem-solving and tactical flexibility. Users could combine different Vigors for synergistic effects, such as using Bucking Bronco to levitate enemies before hitting them with Devil's Kiss for devastating aerial explosions. The presence of environmental hazards like skylines and the city's elevated architecture created additional opportunities for creative Vigor applications. 14. The truth about Anna DeWitt. The revelation of Elizabeth's true identity as Anna DeWitt represented one of BioShock Infinite's most emotionally devastating plot twists, recontextualizing the entire relationship between protagonist and companion. As the layers of deception and false memory peeled away, the tragic reality of a father's greatest mistake emerged with heartbreaking clarity. In an alternate timeline, where Booker DeWitt never underwent baptism and never became Comstock, his life followed a different but equally troubled path. Haunted by his actions at Wounded Knee and drowning in gambling debts, this version of Booker struggled to provide for his infant daughter, Anna. The weight of his guilt and his mounting financial obligations created a perfect storm of desperation that made him vulnerable to an impossible offer. When Robert Luteis appeared on October 8, 1893, with Comstock's proposition to bring us the girl and wipe away the debt, Booker faced the most devastating choice of his life. The promise of debt forgiveness and a better life for Anna seemed like salvation for both father and daughter. In his desperate state, Booker convinced himself that giving Anna to wealthy, respectable people would provide her with opportunities he could never offer. The transaction itself was arranged with cold efficiency that belied its emotional complexity. Comstock, accompanied by Robert Luteis, arrived at Booker's modest apartment to collect the child. The exchange was meant to be simple. Anna's custody transferred to Comstock in exchange for the elimination of Booker's debts. Both parties would get what they needed, and everyone would presumably benefit from the arrangement. However, the moment Booker handed over his daughter, the reality of his decision struck him with devastating force. Paternal instincts and love overwhelmed practical considerations as he realized he was losing the most important thing in his life. His desperate attempt to reverse the transaction led to a struggle that would have consequences across multiple realities. As Comstock and Robert Luteis escaped through a tear back to their own reality with Anna, Booker pursued them in a desperate attempt to reclaim his daughter. The closing of the dimensional portal caught Anna halfway through the transition, severing the tip of her right pinky finger. This traumatic amputation left her existing simultaneously in two realities. Her finger remained in Booker's world, while the rest of her passed into Comstock's. The psychological trauma of losing Anna destroyed what remained of Booker's stability. The letters AD carved into his right hand served as a permanent reminder of his failure as a father and his moment of ultimate weakness. These scars would later be interpreted as the mark of the false shepherd, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that drew him back to Columbia years later. Comstock's decision to rename Anna as Elizabeth was part of his comprehensive program to erase her original identity and replace it with a mythology that served his purposes. All records of her true origins were destroyed or classified, and her upbringing was carefully controlled to ensure she never questioned the official story of her divine birth. The amputation of Anna's finger had consequences far beyond the physical trauma. Her existence in two realities simultaneously granted her the ability to perceive and manipulate tears in space-time, making her one of the most powerful individuals in the multiverse. Comstock recognized this potential and constructed the elaborate prison of Monument Island to control and harness her abilities, while preventing her from discovering the truth about her origins. 15. The Lutece Conspiracy. Behind Columbia's grandest deceptions lay the complex motivations and hidden agenda of the Lutece twins, whose scientific genius had made both the city's existence and its ultimate destruction possible. Their true relationship and ultimate goals remained hidden beneath layers of quantum mechanics and temporal manipulation that spanned multiple realities. Rosalind Lutece, the original female physicist from Columbia's reality, had initially approached her research with pure scientific curiosity. Her discovery of the Lutece field and its applications for quantum levitation had been driven by academic interest rather than political ambition. However, Comstock's appropriation of her work for his floating city project gradually drew her into moral complexities she hadn't anticipated. The introduction of Robert Lutece, her male counterpart from an alternate reality, marked a turning point in both their scientific work and their ethical perspective. Brought into Columbia's timeline through Rosalind's tear experiments, Robert provided both scientific collaboration and a different moral viewpoint shaped by his experiences in an alternate timeline. His presence also introduced complications that neither version of Lutece had fully anticipated. Initially, both Luteces supported Comstock's vision for Columbia, viewing it as an opportunity to see their scientific theories implemented on a grand scale. The construction of a floating city powered by their quantum technology represented the ultimate validation of their research and its practical applications. Their collaboration with Comstock seemed to offer unlimited resources for further experimentation and discovery. However, their perspective began to change as they witnessed the increasingly extreme applications of their technology. Comstock's use of tears to gain prophetic knowledge, his plans for Elizabeth's future, and his willingness to commit murder to protect his secrets gradually alienated both versions of Lutece. Their scientific excitement gave way to moral concern as they realized the consequences of their innovations. The breaking point came with Comstock's plan to steal Anna DeWitt from her father in an alternate reality. Robert Lutece's participation in this kidnapping marked his final act of cooperation with Comstock's regime. The sight of Booker's anguish and Anna's traumatic amputation during the dimensional transfer convinced both Luteces that they had become complicit in unconscionable crimes. Comstock's subsequent decision to eliminate the Luteces reflected his recognition that they had become unreliable allies who might expose his secrets. The apparent murder of both scientists was staged as another terrorist attack, but the reality was more complex. The assassination attempt using their own tear technology scattered them across multiple realities rather than simply killing them. This quantum dispersal granted the Luteces a form of immortality and omnipresence that allowed them to observe events across multiple timelines simultaneously. They could see the consequences of Comstock's actions playing out across infinite realities, and began to understand the true scope of the damage they had inadvertently enabled through their scientific discoveries. Their subsequent efforts to bring various versions of Booker DeWitt to Columbia represented an attempt to correct their earlier mistakes. However, their initial approaches focused on changing variables, specific outcomes, rather than addressing the fundamental constants that made those outcomes inevitable. Each iteration of their plan achieved slightly different results, but failed to address the core problem. The Luteces' apparent omniscience and cryptic behavior stemmed from their unique perspective as beings existing simultaneously across multiple realities. They could remember previous iterations of events and anticipate future developments based on their observations of parallel timelines. This knowledge allowed them to manipulate circumstances while maintaining plausible deniability about their true agenda. 16. Columbia's social hierarchy. Beneath Columbia's gleaming facade of American exceptionalism lay a rigidly stratified society that reflected the darkest aspects of early 20th century American culture. The floating city's social structure was built on foundations of racial supremacy, religious fundamentalism, and economic inequality that pervaded every aspect of daily life. At the apex of Columbia's hierarchy stood the Founders, the ultra-nationalist political party led by Zachary Hale Comstock. This group consisted primarily of wealthy white Protestant Americans who viewed themselves as the inheritors of the Founding Fathers' vision for America. They controlled Columbia's government, economy, and cultural institutions, using their power to enforce their vision of racial and cultural purity. The Founders' ideology combined American nationalism with religious fundamentalism and scientific racism, creating a worldview that justified their dominance while demonizing anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of true Americans. Their political rhetoric portrayed white Americans as a chosen people destined to rule over inferior races and spread their superior civilization throughout the world. Below the Founders in Columbia's hierarchy were the working-class white Americans who formed the bulk of the city's population. These citizens enjoyed the privileges of their racial status while remaining economically dependent on the founder elite. They provided the political support necessary for the Founders' continued dominance while serving as foot soldiers in the enforcement of Columbia's racial hierarchy. At the bottom of Columbia's social structure were the minority populations who provided essential labor while being denied basic civil rights. Chinese immigrants, Irish Catholics, African Americans, and other non-Protestant minorities were relegated to service positions and manual labor, often working in dangerous conditions for minimal compensation. Their exclusion from political participation ensured they had no legal recourse against exploitation. Columbia's economic system reflected these social divisions through a combination of free market capitalism and systematic discrimination. The Fink Manufacturing Company, led by Jeremiah Fink, dominated the city's industrial production while maintaining a workforce stratified along racial and ethnic lines. White workers received better pay and working conditions, while minority laborers were treated as expendable resources. The city's residential patterns reinforced social hierarchies through segregation that was both formal and informal. The affluent areas like Emporia featured elegant shops, beautiful architecture, and cultural amenities exclusively for white citizens. Working-class districts provided basic housing and services for white workers, while minority populations were confined to overcrowded and underserved areas. Columbia's educational and cultural institutions served to indoctrinate citizens in founder ideology while providing limited opportunities for social mobility. Schools taught a version of American history that glorified white achievement while minimizing or erasing the contributions of minority groups. Cultural events and public celebrations reinforced messages of racial superiority and national destiny, Religious institutions played a crucial role in legitimizing Colombia's social hierarchy by providing theological justification for racial supremacy and political inequality. Comstock's interpretation of Christianity emphasized concepts of divine election and manifest destiny that portrayed social inequality as part of God's plan for humanity. The enforcement of Colombia's social order relied on both formal security forces and informal social pressure. Police and military units maintained order through surveillance and violence, while social ostracism and economic retaliation discouraged dissent among privileged groups. The constant threat of exile from the city served as a powerful deterrent against challenging the established order. 17. The Boxer Rebellion and Colombia's fall. Colombia's transformation from American showcase to rogue state began with its unauthorized intervention in the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, an event that revealed the extent of Comstock's messianic ambitions and marked the beginning of the city's separation from the United States government that had created it. The Boxer Rebellion represented a crisis in China where anti-foreign sentiment had erupted into violence against Western missionaries, diplomats, and Chinese Christians. 8 foreign powers, including the United States, organized a relief expedition to protect their nationals and suppress the rebellion. This international crisis provided Comstock with an opportunity to demonstrate Colombia's military capabilities while advancing his vision of American destiny. Without authorization from Washington, Comstock deployed Colombia's military forces to participate in the suppression of the Boxer Rebellion. This intervention was presented to Colombia's citizens as a divine mission to demonstrate American superiority and spread Christian civilization to the benighted peoples of the world. Comstock's propaganda machine portrayed the deployment as fulfilling biblical prophecies about the triumph of the righteous over the heathen. Colombia's military intervention in China proved devastatingly effective, utilizing the city's advanced technology and elevated position to achieve decisive victories against Boxer forces. The floating city's aerial bombardment capabilities and superior firepower allowed it to inflict massive casualties while suffering minimal losses. These military successes reinforced Comstock's claims about divine favor and American superiority. However, Colombia's unauthorized military action created a diplomatic crisis between Comstock and the United States government. Federal authorities had not approved the intervention and were alarmed by Colombia's demonstration of independent military capability. The sight of an American city conducting foreign policy without government oversight raised fundamental questions about sovereignty and loyalty. The diplomatic fallout intensified when reports of Colombia's military tactics reached Washington. Accounts of indiscriminate bombardment and civilian casualties contradicted official American policy and embarrassed the government on the international stage. The revelation that Colombia had acted independently damaged America's relationships with other foreign powers involved in the intervention. Comstock's response to government criticism revealed the depth of his break with mainstream American politics. Rather than apologizing or moderating his position, he doubled down on his claims of divine authority and denounced federal officials as corrupt politicians who had betrayed America's true mission. His propaganda portrayed the government's opposition as evidence of their spiritual corruption and unfitness to lead. The confrontation reached its climax when federal authorities demanded that Colombia submit to government oversight and cease its independent military operations. Comstock's rejection of these demands led to his decision to declare Colombia's secession from the United States, transforming the floating city from a showcase of American achievement into a rogue state with unclear intentions. Colombia's secession was presented to its citizens as a heroic act of independence, comparable to the original American Revolution. Comstock's propaganda portrayed the federal government as a corrupt empire that had betrayed the Founding Fathers' vision, making secession not only justified, but morally necessary. The anniversary of secession became one of Colombia's most important holidays. The practical consequences of secession included Colombia's disappearance into the clouds, where it could avoid government retaliation while maintaining its independence. This isolation allowed Comstock to accelerate his most extreme policies without external interference, but it also cut Colombia off from the resources and relationships that had originally sustained it. 18. The vigorous propaganda machine. Throughout Colombia, an omnipresent propaganda system worked tirelessly to reinforce Comstock's ideology and maintain social control through carefully crafted messages that blended nationalism, racism, and religious fundamentalism into a coherent worldview that justified the city's extreme policies. The visual landscape of Colombia served as a constant reminder of founder ideology through monuments, murals, and architectural choices that celebrated white American achievement while demonizing other cultures and races. Every public space featured imagery that reinforced messages about racial hierarchy, divine destiny, and American exceptionalism. These visual elements created an environment where founder ideology seemed natural and inevitable. Kinetoscopes throughout the city provided moving picture entertainment that doubled as ideological instruction. These early film presentations depicted historical events through a lens that emphasized white heroism and minority villainy, creating a shared cultural narrative that justified Colombia's policies while entertaining its citizens. The combination of education and entertainment made propaganda more palatable and effective. Colombia's educational system served as a primary vehicle for ideological indoctrination, teaching children a version of American history that glorified the Founding Fathers while minimizing or erasing the experiences of minority groups. Textbooks and lesson plans reinforced messages about racial superiority and divine destiny, ensuring that each new generation internalized founder beliefs from an early age. Religious services throughout Colombia integrated political messages with spiritual instruction, presenting Comstock's ideology as divinely inspired truth rather than human opinion. Sermons regularly connected biblical themes with contemporary political issues, creating a worldview where opposition to founder policies constituted rebellion against God himself. This fusion of politics and religion made dissent seem both unpatriotic and blasphemous. Public celebrations and festivals provided opportunities for mass participation in ideological rituals that reinforced social bonds while promoting founder messages. Events like the anniversary of secession combined entertainment with political education, creating positive emotional associations with founder ideology while providing outlets for collective expression of shared values. The propaganda machine also worked to demonize potential threats to social order through carefully constructed enemy narratives. The false shepherd prophecy, warnings about foreign influence, and characterizations of the vox populi as terrorists all served to create external threats that justified internal repression while unifying Colombia's citizens against common enemies. Colombia's media infrastructure ensured that founder messages reached every citizen through multiple channels simultaneously. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, public announcements, and personal communications all reinforced the same basic themes, creating an information environment where alternative viewpoints seem foreign and dangerous. Consumer culture in Colombia incorporated ideological messages into everyday commercial transactions. Products, advertisements, and shopping experiences all reinforced founder values, while making political conformity seem like personal choice. The integration of politics with commerce made ideology seem like common sense rather than contested opinion. 19. Elizabeth's awakening. As Elizabeth's journey through Colombia progressed, her sheltered worldview underwent a profound transformation that challenged everything she had been taught about herself, her city, and her place in the world. The young woman who had dreamed of Paris while imprisoned in her tower gradually awakened to both her true heritage and her cosmic significance. Elizabeth's initial exposure to Colombia's society shocked her naive sensibilities with its casual cruelty and systematic oppression. Having been raised on idealized books and art that portrayed the world in terms of clear moral distinctions, she was unprepared for the complex realities of prejudice, violence, and political manipulation that defined daily life in the floating city. Her reactions to Colombia's racism revealed the fundamental decency that her isolation had preserved from corruption. Unlike the city's citizens, who had been indoctrinated from childhood to accept racial hierarchy as natural, Elizabeth responded to discrimination with immediate moral revulsion. Her outsider perspective allowed her to see the injustice that others had been trained to ignore. The revelation of Colombia's true history, through her growing understanding of tears and alternate realities, forced Elizabeth to confront the gap between official mythology and historical reality. She discovered that many of the stories she had been told about her origins, her father, and her city were elaborate lies designed to maintain Comstock's power and justify his crimes. Elizabeth's expanding powers brought both liberation and terrible responsibility as she began to perceive the quantum structure of reality itself. Her ability to see across multiple timelines revealed the scope of suffering that existed throughout the multiverse, while demonstrating her potential to reshape reality on a fundamental level. This cosmic awareness came with psychological pressures that few beings could withstand. Her relationship with Booker evolved from initial wariness to deep trust as they faced danger together, and she began to sense the deeper connections between them. Their partnership combined her reality-manipulating abilities with his combat skills and street wisdom, creating a formidable team capable of challenging Colombia's most powerful forces. The destruction of the siphon device marked Elizabeth's complete awakening to her true nature as a being capable of perceiving and manipulating the fundamental structure of existence. This transformation elevated her from a powerful but limited individual to a cosmic entity with godlike awareness of infinite possibilities and their consequences. Her growing understanding of constants and variables allowed Elizabeth to see beyond individual events to the meta-patterns that governed all possible realities. This perspective revealed that the problems they faced weren't limited to their specific timeline, but were replicated across infinite variations of their story, requiring solutions that addressed fundamental rather than superficial causes. The emotional toll of cosmic awareness became increasingly apparent as Elizabeth struggled to maintain her humanity while processing information about infinite suffering and possibility. Her journey from sheltered innocent to cosmic entity represented one of gaming's most compelling character arcs, combining personal growth with philosophical complexity. 20. The battle for Colombia's soul. As the conflict between the founders and the Vox Populi escalated into open warfare, Colombia became a battleground where competing visions of American identity clashed with devastating consequences for the city's inhabitants. The revolution that erupted challenged not only political control, but the fundamental values that would define Colombia's future. The Vox Populi's uprising began as a coordinated strike against founder infrastructure, targeting key installations that maintained the city's operations while avoiding civilian areas whenever possible. Initial phases of the revolution focused on liberating oppressed workers and seizing control of strategic locations, rather than pursuing indiscriminate violence against Colombia's white population. However, the dynamics of revolutionary warfare gradually corrupted the Vox Populi's initial restraint, as cycles of violence and retaliation escalated beyond anyone's control. Founder security forces' brutal suppression of early protests radicalized moderate Vox members, while providing justification for increasingly extreme retaliatory measures. The revolution's idealistic goals became subordinated to the immediate demands of survival and vengeance. Daisy Fitzroy's leadership of the Vox Populi reflected these escalating dynamics as her personal grievances against the Comstock regime merged with broader revolutionary objectives. Her transformation from domestic servant to revolutionary leader embodied the justified anger of Colombia's oppressed populations, while also demonstrating how victimization could breed its own forms of extremism. The founders' response to the uprising revealed the authoritarian tendencies that had always lurked beneath Colombia's civilized facade. Comstock's security forces implemented increasingly draconian measures to maintain order, including martial law, mass arrests, and collective punishment that targeted entire communities suspected of Vox sympathies. Elizabeth's witness to revolutionary violence forced her to confront the moral complexity of political change in ways her sheltered upbringing had never prepared her for. Her idealistic notions of justice and liberation clashed with the reality that even justified revolutions could produce innocent victims and moral compromises that challenged absolute ethical principles. The revelation that some versions of the revolution led to Vox victory but continued oppression demonstrated the cyclical nature of political violence and the difficulty of breaking patterns of hatred and revenge. Through tears into alternate realities, Elizabeth saw that replacing one oppressive system with another solved none of the fundamental problems that had created the conflict. Booker's role in the conflict reflected his own complex relationship with violence and justice, as someone who had participated in atrocities while also fighting against oppression. His actions during the revolution demonstrated both his capacity for heroism and his willingness to use violence when he deemed it necessary for protecting Elizabeth and achieving their goals. The destruction that engulfed Colombia during the revolution served as a metaphor for the broader collapse of American ideals when taken to extremes. Both the founders' racial supremacy and the Vox Populi's revolutionary violence represented distortions of legitimate American values, freedom, equality, and justice that had been corrupted by hatred and extremism. 21. The burden of infinite possibility. As Elizabeth's powers reached their full potential, she gained the terrible gift of perceiving all possible outcomes across infinite realities, a cosmic awareness that revealed both the scope of existence and the weight of responsibility that came with godlike knowledge and ability. The destruction of the siphon unleashed Elizabeth's complete range of reality-manipulating abilities, allowing her to see the quantum threads that connected all possible versions of events across the multiverse. This expansion of consciousness revealed that their specific story was just one iteration of infinite variations, each playing out the same fundamental conflicts with different details and outcomes. Elizabeth's perception of infinite timelines showed her versions of herself and Booker experiencing every conceivable relationship and outcome. In some realities, they never met. In others, they were enemies. In still others, their relationship followed completely different trajectories that led to unimaginable consequences. This knowledge of infinite possibility created psychological pressures that strained her human identity. The realization that every choice created new branches of reality, and that every possible choice was being made somewhere in the multiverse, challenged conventional notions of moral responsibility and meaningful action. If infinite versions of herself were making different decisions, did her specific choices matter? Elizabeth struggled with this question as she tried to determine what constituted ethical action in the face of infinite possibility. Her growing awareness revealed that the problems they faced weren't unique to their timeline, but were fundamental patterns that repeated across infinite realities. Comstock's crimes, Colombia's oppression, and the cycles of violence between the founders and Vox Populi all occurred in countless variations throughout the multiverse. This knowledge suggested that addressing surface symptoms would never solve the underlying problems. The burden of cosmic knowledge manifested in Elizabeth's increasing emotional detachment from immediate events as she struggled to process information about infinite suffering and possibility. Her human empathy remained intact, but her perspective expanded beyond individual concerns to encompass the broader patterns that governed existence across all realities. Elizabeth's realization that she had the power to reshape reality at a fundamental level came with the terrible responsibility of determining how that power should be used. Her ability to manipulate the constants that governed all timelines meant that her choices could affect not just their specific reality, but the entire structure of the multiverse. The question of whether it was morally acceptable to eliminate infinite versions of Comstock by preventing his creation challenged Elizabeth's understanding of justice and punishment. While Comstock's crimes were undeniable, the decision to erase someone from existence across all possible timelines represented a form of cosmic death penalty that raised profound ethical questions. Her growing understanding of the relationship between constants and variables suggested that truly meaningful change required addressing the fundamental choice points that created problematic patterns rather than simply preventing specific instances of harm. This knowledge pointed towards solutions that were both more effective and more morally complex than simple intervention. 22. The shocking truth revealed. The climactic revelation that Booker DeWitt and Zachary Hale Comstock were alternate versions of the same person represented one of gaming's most stunning plot twists, recontextualizing every element of the story while forcing both characters and players to reconsider everything they thought they understood about identity, responsibility, and redemption. The truth emerged gradually through a combination of Elizabeth's expanding awareness, careful examination of evidence throughout Columbia, and the Luteces' cryptic guidance toward inevitable revelation. Small details that had seemed insignificant, shared memories, similar mannerisms, and identical scarring from Wounded Knee suddenly gained profound significance as pieces of a larger puzzle. Elizabeth's cosmic perspective allowed her to see the quantum threads that connected all versions of the same person across different timelines. Her realization that Booker and Comstock shared the same fundamental identity explained both their similarities and their profound differences as expressions of the same individual, shaped by a single crucial choice. The baptism at Wounded Knee emerged as the pivotal moment where reality split into two paths, creating the divergent timelines that produce both Booker and Comstock. In one timeline, guilt-ridden Booker DeWitt rejected spiritual cleansing and carried his shame into a future of self-destruction. In another, the same guilt drove him to accept baptism and emerge as the zealot Zachary Hale Comstock. This revelation explained Comstock's seemingly impossible knowledge of Booker's past and his ability to predict the false shepherd's actions. He wasn't truly prophetic, but rather understood Booker's psychology from the inside, knowing how his alternate self would respond to various situations because they shared the same fundamental nature and formative experiences. The irony of Booker's mission became devastatingly clear. He had been seeking to undo the consequences of his own alternate self's actions while struggling with the same guilt and self-loathing that had driven Comstock's transformation. His journey to rescue Elizabeth was literally an attempt to correct his own mistakes across parallel realities. Elizabeth's discovery that her imprisonment had been orchestrated by an alternate version of her own father added layers of psychological complexity to her relationship with both Booker and Comstock. The man she had come to trust and care for was fundamentally the same person as the zealot who had stolen her childhood and murdered her adoptive mother. The revelation also explained the depth of Comstock's obsession with Elizabeth and his plans for her future. Having been rendered sterile by exposure to tear technology, he had stolen a child from his alternate self, not just to secure an heir, but to claim what he believed was rightfully his. A version of the daughter he could never father naturally. Booker's initial rejection of the truth reflected the psychological defense mechanisms that had allowed both versions of himself to function despite their shared trauma. The compartmentalization that had enabled him to survive Wounded Knee also prevented him from accepting the full implications of his connection to Comstock. 23. Burial at Sea. The Rapture Connection. The Burial at Sea downloadable content revealed unexpected connections between Columbia and Rapture, demonstrating that the constants of a man, a lighthouse, and a city could manifest in dramatically different forms, while following the same fundamental patterns across alternate realities. Episode 1 introduced a version of Comstock who had escaped the destruction of his timeline and established a new identity in Rapture as private investigator Booker DeWitt. This Comstock had lost his memories of his prophetic past due to the trauma of crossing between realities, allowing him to live a relatively normal life in Andrew Ryan's underwater city before the events that would destroy it. The presence of this surviving Comstock in Rapture created ripple effects that connected the two cities across time and space. His very existence represented a loose thread in the cosmic order that Elizabeth felt compelled to address, leading to events that would ultimately tie together the entire BioShock series in unexpected ways. Elizabeth's pursuit of this final Comstock revealed the emotional toll of her cosmic awareness and her determination to eliminate every version of the man who had stolen her childhood. Her appearance in Rapture as a femme fatale seeking revenge demonstrated how her godlike powers could be motivated by very human desires for justice and closure. Episode 2 shifted perspective to Elizabeth herself as she navigated Rapture's increasingly dangerous environment in the early stages of its civil war. Playing as Elizabeth rather than Booker provided a completely different gameplay experience that emphasized stealth, problem-solving, and survival rather than direct confrontation. The DLC revealed that Elizabeth's actions in Rapture had unintended consequences that helped set the stage for the original BioShock's events. Her attempts to save a young girl named Sally resulted in her providing crucial assistance to the resistance forces that would eventually enable Jack's successful infiltration of Rapture. Through her experiences in Rapture, Elizabeth discovered information about plasmid technology that provided context for Columbia's vigors. The revelation that Jeremiah Fink had stolen plasmid research through observations of alternate realities explained the similarities between the two cities' enhancement systems while maintaining their distinct characteristics. The connection between Columbia and Rapture extended beyond simple technological parallels to encompass broader themes about utopian societies and their inevitable corruption. Both cities represented attempts to create perfect societies that ultimately collapsed due to their founders' failure to account for human nature and the consequences of extreme ideologies. Elizabeth's sacrifice in Rapture to ensure Sally's safety and enable Jack's future success demonstrated her evolution from cosmic entity concerned with infinite possibilities to an individual making personal choices based on human compassion and moral conviction. The Burial at Sea episodes provided closure not just for BioShock Infinite's story, but for the entire BioShock series, revealing the cosmic connections that linked all three games while honouring the distinct identity and themes of each installment. 24. The cycle of violence and redemption. Throughout BioShock Infinite's narrative, cycles of violence and attempts at redemption form a central theme that connects personal trauma with broader social conflicts, examining how guilt, revenge, and the desire for absolution shape both individual choices and collective history. Booker's participation in the Wounded Knee massacre established the foundational trauma that would define both versions of his character across multiple timelines. The guilt from participating in systematic slaughter created psychological wounds that neither version could fully heal. Booker through self-destructive behavior and Comstock through religious extremism and the displacement of guilt onto others. Guilt onto others. The massacre at Wounded Knee represented a microcosm of American expansion and the violence inherent in the conquest of indigenous peoples. Booker's role in this historical atrocity connected his personal trauma to broader patterns of national violence and racial oppression that would later manifest in Columbia's extreme policies. Comstock's transformation through baptism represented an attempt to escape responsibility for past actions through spiritual rebirth. But his solution ultimately created new forms of violence and oppression. Rather than genuinely confronting his guilt, he channeled it into religious zealotry that justified even greater atrocities in the name of divine will. The cycle of violence between the founders and the Vox Populi demonstrated how oppression breeds resistance, which in turn breeds escalating cycles of retaliation and revenge. Each act of violence by one side justified increasingly extreme responses from the other, creating a spiral of brutality that ultimately consumed Colombia itself. Elizabeth's exposure to these cycles forced her to confront difficult questions about justice, revenge, and the morality of violence in response to oppression. Her evolution from sheltered idealist to cosmic entity capable of ultimate judgment reflected her struggle to find moral clarity in a world defined by competing claims of victimhood and justice. The revelation that Booker and Comstock were the same person added layers of complexity to questions of responsibility and redemption. If both versions shared the same fundamental identity, this raises profound questions about moral accountability across parallel realities. Could redemption be achieved by one version atoning for another's sins? The game leaves these philosophical questions deliberately open to interpretation. Daisy Fitzroy's transformation from victim to perpetrator illustrated how cycles of violence could corrupt even those with legitimate grievances. Her journey from oppressed domestic worker to revolutionary leader willing to threaten children demonstrated the psychological toll of systematic oppression and the difficulty of breaking cycles of hatred. The Luteces' attempts to correct their past mistakes through repeatedly bringing Booker to Colombia represented another form of seeking redemption through repetition rather than fundamental change. Their focus on changing variables rather than constants reflected a failure to understand that true redemption required addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Colombia's destruction ultimately represented the inevitable consequence of cycles of violence that had been allowed to escalate beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. The city's fate served as a warning about the dangers of allowing grievances to fester without addressing their underlying causes. 25. The Philosophy of Choice and Determinism. BioShock Infinite explores profound philosophical questions about free will, determinism, and the nature of choice through its multiverse structure, and the relationship between constants and variables that govern existence across infinite realities. The concept of constants and variables suggests that while infinite possibilities exist, they operate within predetermined parameters that limit the range of meaningful choices. Characters appear to make free decisions, but these choices occur within structures that constrain the most significant outcomes to a few crucial decision points. Booker's choice at the baptism represents the ultimate expression of this philosophical framework, a single moment where free will operates within cosmic constraints to create fundamentally different realities. The baptism serves as a constant across all timelines, but the variable of acceptance or rejection creates divergent paths with radically different consequences. Elizabeth's growing awareness of infinite possibilities raises questions about the nature of moral responsibility when one can see all possible outcomes. If every choice is being made by alternate versions of oneself across the multiverse, do individual decisions carry moral weight? Or are they simply statistical variations in an infinite probability set? The Luteces' existence across multiple realities allows them to observe the same events playing out repeatedly with minor variations, leading to their somewhat detached perspective on human suffering and moral choice. Their experience suggests that cosmic awareness might inevitably lead to emotional distance from individual instances of pain and injustice. The game's deterministic framework challenges traditional notions of heroism and villainy by suggesting that character traits and moral positions might be expressions of fundamental constants rather than genuine choices. This perspective complicates judgments about praise and blame, while raising questions about the nature of personal identity. The multiverse structure also explores the relationship between individual agency and historical inevitability, while characters make choices that affect their immediate circumstances. The broader patterns of their stories seem to follow predetermined structures that limit the scope of truly transformative change. Elizabeth's ultimate decision to eliminate Comstock by preventing his creation represents an attempt to exercise genuine free will by addressing the constants that govern all possible timelines. This choice transcends the variable-level decisions that had characterized previous attempts at change. The philosophical implications extend to questions about the nature of redemption and punishment across multiple realities. If infinite versions of Comstock exist across the multiverse, is it just to eliminate all of them for the crimes of one? Elizabeth's decisions suggest that some problems require cosmic rather than individual solutions. The game's exploration of choice and determinism reflects broader philosophical debates about whether human behavior is ultimately predictable or whether genuine freedom exists within deterministic systems. The constants and variables framework provides a middle ground that acknowledges both structure and agency. 26. The technology of Columbia. Columbia's technological marvels represented a unique fusion of early 20th century engineering, quantum physics, and speculative science that created a believable foundation for the city's impossible existence, while reflecting the era's optimistic faith in technological progress. The Lutece field served as the fundamental technology that made Columbia possible, using quantum manipulation to suspend matter in fixed positions relative to space-time. This scientific breakthrough allowed massive structures to defy gravity while maintaining stable positions in three-dimensional space, creating the foundation for a floating city. Skylines provided both transportation and combat environments throughout Columbia, utilizing electromagnetic principles to create high-speed rail networks that connected the city's various districts. These transportation systems reflected the era's fascination with electric power, while providing unique gameplay opportunities that distinguished Columbia from other gaming environments. The Handymen represented Columbia's most disturbing technological achievement, the fusion of human consciousness with mechanical bodies to create powerful but tragic automatons. These cyborgs embodied the era's anxieties about industrialization and the replacement of human workers with machines while serving as boss enemies, with both formidable abilities and sympathetic backstories. Motorized patriots combined advanced robotics with propaganda functions, creating mechanical soldiers that could both fight enemies and deliver patriotic speeches. Their design reflected Columbia's fusion of military power with ideological indoctrination, while providing distinctive enemies that embodied the city's nationalism. The Siphon device represented perhaps Columbia's most sophisticated technology, using quantum field manipulation to control and limit Elizabeth's reality-altering abilities. This machine demonstrated the city's advanced understanding of the dimensional physics, while serving crucial narrative functions related to Elizabeth's character development. Vending machines throughout Columbia showcased the city's consumer culture, while providing gameplay functionality through weapon and vigor upgrades. These automated merchants reflected early 20th century America's growing commercial sophistication, while creating immersive environments that felt lived in and functional. The city's architectural engineering required unprecedented solutions to problems of weight distribution, structural stability, and environmental control in an aerial environment. Columbia's buildings had to function as both impressive monuments and practical structures capable of withstanding the stresses of constant movement through atmospheric conditions. Communication technology in Columbia included both conventional systems like telephones and advanced quantum communication networks that allowed coordination between the city's various districts. These systems reflected the era's rapid advancement in electrical communications, while providing infrastructure for Colombia's complex operations. Security systems throughout Colombia combined traditional surveillance methods with advanced technologies like automated turrets and sophisticated alarm networks. These systems created challenging gameplay environments while demonstrating the authoritarian aspects of Comstock's regime. 27. Character analysis. Booker DeWitt. Booker DeWitt's character represents one of gaming's most complex protagonists, a man whose personal journey of redemption intersects with cosmic themes of identity, choice, and the possibility of changing one's fundamental nature through confronting past trauma. His background as a Pinkerton detective and Civil War veteran established him as someone familiar with violence and morally ambiguous work, making him both capable of handling Colombia's dangers and complicit in systems of oppression. This professional experience provided practical skills while raising questions about his moral compass, though we should note that Booker actually served in the Indian Wars rather than the Civil War, having been born in 1874. Booker's guilt over the Wounded Knee massacre served as the defining trauma that shaped both his character and his alternate self's transformation into Comstock. His inability to process this guilt through healthy means led to self-destructive behaviors, including gambling, drinking, and accepting increasingly questionable professional assignments. The AD branding on his hand represented both a mark of shame and a self-inflicted reminder of his failure as a father. These letters, which marked him as the false shepherd in Colombia's prophecies, created a self-fulfilling prophecy that drew him back into conflict with his alternate self. His relationship with Elizabeth evolved from purely transactional to genuinely paternal, as he gradually remembered his true connection to her. This development allowed him to experience redemption through protecting and caring for the daughter he had once abandoned, though the full truth remained hidden until the story's climax. Booker's combat skills and survival instincts made him effective in Colombia's increasingly dangerous environment, but his reliance on violence also reflected his inability to resolve conflicts through other means. His approach to problems consistently involved fighting rather than negotiation or compromise. His interactions with Colombia's inhabitants revealed his complicated relationship with American identity and values. While he opposed the city's extreme racism and authoritarianism, he also embodied many problematic aspects of American masculinity, including violence, emotional repression, and difficulty forming meaningful relationships. The revelation that he was fundamentally the same person as Comstock forced him to confront the darkest possibilities of his own nature. This discovery challenged his sense of moral superiority while revealing that his capacity for good and evil existed within the same fundamental character structure. His ultimate sacrifice to prevent Comstock's existence across all timelines represented a form of redemption that transcended individual guilt to address cosmic-level problems. This choice demonstrated growth from someone focused on personal survival to someone capable of making decisions based on universal moral principles. 28. Character analysis. Elizabeth. Elizabeth's character arc represents one of the most sophisticated examples of character development in gaming, tracing her evolution from sheltered prisoner to cosmic entity, while maintaining her essential humanity and moral compass throughout her transformation. Her upbringing in isolation created a unique perspective that combined vast intellectual knowledge with emotional innocence, making her both incredibly well-educated and profoundly naive about human nature and social dynamics. This combination allowed her to see Colombia's injustices with fresh eyes, while struggling to understand their complexity. Her ability to manipulate tears represented both a supernatural gift and a burden that grew heavier as her powers expanded. Initially, her abilities seemed like simple magic, but they gradually revealed themselves to be cosmic forces that could reshape reality at fundamental levels. Elizabeth's relationship with books and learning reflected her hunger for knowledge and connection with the wider world that had been denied to her through imprisonment. Her idealized understanding of places like Paris demonstrated both her intellectual curiosity and her lack of real-world experience. Her moral development throughout the story showed her grappling with increasingly complex ethical situations that challenged her black and white understanding of right and wrong. Her exposure to Colombia's revolution forced her to confront the reality that good intentions could lead to harmful outcomes. The gradual revelation of her true origins as Anna DeWitt created profound psychological conflicts as she struggled to reconcile her identity as Comstock's daughter with the reality of her kidnapping and abuse. This discovery forced her to reconstruct her entire understanding of self and family. Her growing cosmic awareness brought terrible knowledge about infinite suffering and possibility across all realities, creating psychological pressures that few beings could withstand. Her ability to maintain empathy and moral conviction, despite this overwhelming perspective, demonstrated remarkable strength of character. Her relationship with the songbird reflected the complex emotions surrounding her imprisonment. She felt genuine affection for her mechanical guardian, while also resenting its role in maintaining her captivity. This relationship symbolized the broader complexity of her feelings toward Comstock and Columbia. Her ultimate decision to sacrifice herself to ensure the complete elimination of Comstock across all timelines represented the culmination of her character development, from sheltered victim to cosmic savior, willing to make ultimate sacrifices for universal justice. 29. The ending explained. BioShock Infinite's conclusion represents one of gaming's most complex and philosophically ambitious endings, requiring careful analysis to understand its implications for the characters, the story, and the broader themes the game explores. Elizabeth's revelation that she and Booker must travel back to the moment of his baptism to prevent Comstock's creation across all timelines demonstrates her understanding that the only way to solve their problem is to address its source at the level of constants rather than variables. The scene at the baptism features multiple versions of Elizabeth from different realities, representing the convergence of all possible timelines at the crucial choice point that creates the Booker-Comstock divergence. This gathering suggests that the solution requires cosmic-level intervention rather than individual action. Booker's willing participation in his own drowning represents his acceptance of responsibility for both his own crimes and those of his alternate self. This choice demonstrates genuine redemption through sacrifice rather than simple escape from consequences. The drowning itself serves multiple symbolic functions. It represents both the baptism that Booker originally rejected and a form of reverse baptism that prevents the spiritual rebirth that created Comstock. This inversion suggests that true redemption sometimes requires accepting death rather than seeking new life. The aftermath of Booker's sacrifice appears to erase not only Comstock, but all the events that his existence made possible, including Columbia itself and the suffering it caused. This cosmic retcon suggests that some problems can only be solved by preventing them from ever occurring. The post-credits scene showing Booker awakening in his apartment with baby Anna represents either a new timeline where he never made the choice to sell his daughter, or a restored version of the original timeline before the Luteces' interference. This ambiguous ending leaves questions about the nature of the solution, whether Booker has truly been redeemed, or whether this represents yet another variation in the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. The philosophical implications of the ending raise questions about the ethics of erasing someone from existence across all timelines, and whether such cosmic intervention represents justice or a form of ultimate tyranny. Elizabeth's decision suggests that some problems transcend individual moral frameworks. The ending also explores themes of redemption through sacrifice and the possibility of breaking cycles of violence and trauma through fundamental change, rather than surface-level intervention. Booker's willingness to die for all versions of himself represents a form of universal atonement. The complexity of the ending reflects the game's ambitious attempt to address cosmic-level themes through personal character drama, creating a conclusion that operates simultaneously as individual character resolution and philosophical statement about choice, determinism, and moral responsibility. 30. Legacy and impact. BioShock Infinite's influence on gaming culture, narrative design, and philosophical discourse extends far beyond its initial release, establishing new standards for storytelling complexity, while sparking ongoing debates about its themes and conclusions. The game's narrative structure, combining multiverse theory with personal character drama, influenced subsequent games to explore more complex storytelling techniques and philosophical themes. Its success demonstrated that mainstream audiences could engage with sophisticated concepts when presented through compelling characters and situations. The visual design of Columbia created one of the gaming's most memorable and distinctive environments, establishing a new aesthetic that combined American historical imagery with steampunk technology and religious iconography. This visual language influenced subsequent games and media, exploring similar themes of American exceptionalism and religious extremism. The relationship between Booker and Elizabeth set new standards for AI companion characters in gaming, creating a partnership that felt natural and emotionally meaningful rather than simply functional. Elizabeth's sophisticated behavior and emotional responses influenced subsequent companion character design across the industry. The game's exploration of American history and ideology sparked important conversations about the representation of racism, nationalism, and violence in gaming. Its unflinching portrayal of American historical atrocities and their ongoing legacy created space for more honest engagement with difficult historical topics. The complex ending generated extensive analysis and discussion within gaming communities, academic circles, and popular media, demonstrating the potential for games to engage with philosophical questions traditionally associated with literature and film. This intellectual engagement elevated gaming's cultural status and academic respectability. The game's technical achievements in creating believable aerial environments, advanced AI systems, and complex visual effects pushed the boundaries of what was possible in game development, while maintaining artistic coherence and narrative focus. The voice acting performances, particularly those of Troy Baker and Courtney Draper as Booker and Elizabeth, established new standards for emotional authenticity and character development in gaming voice work. Their chemistry and commitment to their roles elevated the entire production. The musical score, combining period-appropriate compositions with anachronistic arrangements of modern songs, created a unique audio landscape that enhanced the game's themes, while providing memorable moments that players continue to discuss years after release. The Burial at Sea DLC demonstrated how downloadable content could extend and enhance the base game's themes, while connecting it to broader franchise narratives, influencing subsequent approaches to post-launch content development. 31. Themes and symbolism. BioShock Infinite operates on multiple symbolic levels, using its narrative elements to explore profound themes about American identity, religious extremism, family relationships, and the nature of choice and redemption across infinite possibilities. The lighthouse serves as a recurring symbol representing transition points between realities and states of being, from the game's opening at the main lighthouse to the cosmic lighthouse Elizabeth describes in the ending. These structures mark moments where choice determines destiny. Baptism appears throughout the game as a symbol of rebirth and transformation, but also of the ways that seeking spiritual cleansing can become a form of escape from responsibility rather than genuine redemption. Comstock's baptism and Booker's final drowning represent opposing interpretations of the same symbolic act. Birds and cages serve as central metaphors for freedom and imprisonment, appearing in everything from Elizabeth's clothing to the game's marketing materials. The question, which would you choose, the bird or the cage, encapsulates the game's exploration of whether security or freedom should take priority. The Tower of Babel provides a foundational myth that parallels Columbia's story, a city that rises toward heaven through human ambition, but ultimately falls due to divine displeasure and human pride. This biblical parallel adds religious significance to Columbia's fate. Mirrors and reflections appear throughout the game to represent the relationship between Booker and Comstock as alternate versions of the same person. These visual elements foreshadow the revelation, while exploring themes of identity and self-recognition. The color symbolism throughout Columbia contrasts the red, white, and blue of American patriotism with the darker implications of these same colors when associated with violence, racial purity, and authoritarian control. This visual language critiques the symbols of American identity. Debt serves as both literal plot motivation and metaphorical representation of guilt, responsibility, and the ways that past actions create obligations that must eventually be addressed. Booker's financial debt mirrors his moral debt for past crimes. The concept of the seed appears in various forms throughout the game, from Elizabeth's thimble to Comstock's plans for her future, representing potential that can grow into either blessing or curse, depending on the conditions that nurture it. Music functions as a bridge between realities, with anachronistic songs appearing in Columbia that suggest the permeability of dimensional boundaries while providing emotional commentary on the narrative's themes. 32. Critical reception and analysis. BioShock Infinite received widespread critical acclaim upon its release, with particular praise for its narrative ambition, visual design, and character development, though some critics raised questions about its violence and thematic execution. Professional reviews consistently highlighted the game's narrative complexity and philosophical ambition, with many critics praising its willingness to tackle difficult subjects like American racism and religious extremism. The game's Metacritic score of 93, 94 across platforms, reflected this critical consensus. The relationship between Booker and Elizabeth received universal praise for its emotional authenticity and technical sophistication. Critics noted that Elizabeth felt like a genuine character rather than a gameplay mechanic, setting new standards for AI companion design. Visual design and art direction earned particular acclaim for creating a believable and immersive floating city that felt both fantastical and grounded in historical reality. The game's attention to period detail and architectural authenticity impressed critics and players alike. Some critics questioned the disconnect between the game's themes of violence and redemption and its gameplay focus on combat and destruction. This ludonarrative dissonance sparked ongoing debates about whether the game's message was undermined by its mechanics. The complex ending received mixed critical reception, with some praising its philosophical ambition while others criticized it as confusing or pretentious. This division reflected broader debates about whether games should attempt such complex narrative structures. Academic analysis of the game has focused on its treatment of American history, its use of multiverse theory, and its contribution to discussions of narrative complexity in interactive media. The game has become a frequent subject of scholarly examination. Player reception was generally positive, though some found the ending confusing or unsatisfying. The game's community has remained active in analysing and debating its themes and implications years after release. The game's handling of racism and violence sparked important conversations about representation and responsibility in gaming, with critics both praising its willingness to address difficult topics and questioning whether it did so effectively. Commercial success validated the game's approach, demonstrating that complex philosophical narratives could achieve mainstream success while pushing the boundaries of what games could accomplish as storytelling media. 33. The downloadable content. BioShock Infinite's post-launch content provided both extended gameplay challenges and narrative closure, demonstrating how downloadable content could enhance, rather than simply extend the base game experience. Clash in the Clouds offered arena-based combat challenges that focused purely on gameplay mechanics without narrative content. While some criticized this DLC as unnecessary, it provided opportunities for players to experiment with vigor combinations and combat strategies in controlled environments. The Clash in the Clouds DLC included a museum feature that allowed players to unlock concept art, character models, and behind-the-scenes content by completing challenges. This meta-textual element provided insight into the game's development process while rewarding skilled play. Burial at Sea. Episode 1 returned players to Rapture while maintaining BioShock Infinite's characters and mechanics, creating a noir-influenced story that explored the connections between Columbia and Andrew Ryan's underwater city. The first Burial at Sea episode revealed the existence of a Comstock who had escaped Columbia's destruction and established a new identity in Rapture. This narrative choice demonstrated the cosmic scope of the multiverse, while providing closure for Elizabeth's character arc. Episode 2 shifted the player perspective to Elizabeth herself, creating a completely different gameplay experience focused on stealth and problem solving rather than direct combat. This mechanical change reflected Elizabeth's character strengths while providing variety. The second episode's connections to the original BioShock created a sense of cosmic closure for the entire series, revealing how Elizabeth's actions in Rapture helped set up the events of the first game. This ambitious narrative linking impressed many fans, while raising questions about franchise continuity. Both Burial at Sea episodes featured enhanced versions of Rapture that showcased the city before its fall, allowing players to experience Andrew Ryan's underwater utopia in its prime. These environments provided both nostalgia and new perspectives on familiar locations. The DLC's exploration of Elizabeth's character development continued her arc from the base game, while providing definitive closure to her story. Her sacrifice in Rapture completed her transformation from victim to cosmic savior. The season pass structure for BioShock Infinite's DLC influenced subsequent industry practices around post-launch content, demonstrating how additional content could enhance narrative themes rather than simply providing more gameplay. Conclusion. And so concludes our deep dive into the complete story of BioShock Infinite. We've discovered a narrative that operates on multiple levels simultaneously, a personal story of redemption between a father and daughter, a political allegory about American exceptionalism and its darkest expressions, and a cosmic meditation on the nature of choice, identity, and moral responsibility across infinite realities. Through the floating city of Columbia, we've explored how the noblest ideals can be corrupted into their opposites when taken to extremes, how trauma and guilt shape both individual choices and collective history, and how the possibility of redemption exists even in the darkest circumstances. The relationship between Booker and Elizabeth provided an emotional anchor for these complex themes, while demonstrating the power of human connection to transcend even cosmic-level conflicts. The legacy of BioShock Infinite continues to influence gaming and storytelling, proving that interactive media can engage with the most profound philosophical questions while delivering compelling entertainment. Its ambitious attempt to address the relationship between constants and variables in human existence opened new possibilities for what games could accomplish as artistic and intellectual experiences. The spiraling Tower of Columbia may have fallen, but the questions it raised about American identity, moral responsibility, and the nature of choice continue to resonate in a medium often dismissed as mere entertainment. BioShock Infinite demonstrated that games could serve as vehicles for serious examination of history, philosophy, and human nature. Next time on Law to Action, we'll explore another thrilling topic from gaming's vast catalogue of incredible stories. Until then, keep adventuring through those incredible worlds, fellow explorers. There's always a man, always a lighthouse, and always a city. But most importantly, there's always another story waiting to be discovered.